have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair, rather. My first question is for Professor Leckie. C-13, in its current form, will it allow a real substantive equality to be maintained or reached, rather? I'm afraid I won't be able to give you a complete answer. I think that seeing a federal bill refer to a provincial bill infringes upon guaranteed constitutional languages right. The fact that this C-13 latches on to the Charter of the French language creates a balance of power that favors the provincial law that does not reflect the reality of provincial language communities. C-13 tries to better support Francophone communities. That raises questions. I think there's a tendency to say, well, English is doing well in North America. There are millions of Americans who speak English. I think you need to take instead the viewpoint that charter language rights should provide for the support for English language education in Quebec. And administration of justice should be equal as well in both languages. We haven't reached that in Quebec. So I think there are weaknesses. I understand what motivates C-13, but the minorities in Quebec feel that equality will not be reached. What I'm hearing you say is that there is no equality in status in the current version of the bill, or there is a risk of inequality. There are risks of inequality. There has to be a fair balance between what's guaranteed in the Charter and the Constitution. There's a tension between the federal and provincial regimes, and I think there's a risk there. My next question, unless other witnesses would like to add something to that response, I'll go to my next question. My next question is for Mr. Buck. Is the SADC worried about the lack of mention of economic development in the bill? And has it noticed has noted a lack of support for the communities in inequality rather in economic development and support for official language minority communities? Thank you very much for the question, Senator Moncion. It's important to begin by providing support for our Francophone colleagues outside of Quebec. When we're talking about money invested outside of Quebec, we appreciate the investment made directly into French language minority communities outside of Quebec. When you look at the numbers, though, Quebec Anglophones represent some 50% of minority language communities in Canada. When you look at the actual investment, and this is investment in economic development, which is really my field. If you look at the housing fund, something that provides money, there is $85 million invested over 5 years, and we receive on 11.2 or 11.3 million in Quebec. So we immediately see that there's a difference, a major difference in the amount of money granted. If we look at the Economic Development Fund investment, 30.5 million over 5 years. Well, Quebec receives 10.2 million, about a third of the money. A third, yes, but our population represents 50% of the official language minority community population. So those numbers alone say much about the situation. Thank you. My last question, Chair, is for the School Board Association. You mentioned that there is $65 million transferred to the Quebec government for education for Anglophones in Quebec. But you said 58% of that money goes directly to Quebec coffers. I'd like you to explain that situation to me. Goes directly to the Quebec Treasury, that is. Could you explain that? Where are your numbers from? And have they been corroborated, this 58% figure? Senator, the 65 million is transferred to the Quebec government, and that includes 8 million yearly for the teaching of English as a second language. 8%, 12% rather, does not go to English language school boards or the English language network. It goes to the French network, to the Ministry of Education for the teaching of English as a second language in French language schools. To corroborate those numbers, I found them in a Ministry of Education report that is not public, but that covers the total amounts sent to the Quebec government by the federal government. The Education for Official Language Minorities program, in my opinion, works like works this way. The money is transferred to the government of Quebec, and unless the Quebec government contradicts its own figures, 58% of that money go 12% goes to second language, English second language. 20% is for English language education and immersion, French language immersion, and 8% goes to higher education, that is cégep level and university level teaching. Can I prove it with a document? No, because indeed, these figures are not available publicly. Thank you for the explanation. I wasn't doubting what you were saying, rather that what you're going through with regard to money that should be yours, that should be coming to you, the exact same situation exists outside of Quebec with French language minority communities. Thank you. Your explanation was very clear. You're welcome. There is an exception, and I'll insist that, at least in the FPT protocol, signed by 9 provinces and 3 agreements, there are mechanisms, stronger mechanisms with regard to transparency and consultation that you won't find in the bilateral agreement between Quebec and the federal government.